Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Campus. I'm Cooper Drury, the Senior Associate Dean in the College of Arts and Science here at Mizzou. We launched this series 5 years ago with the hope that we would bring some of the amazing work done by our faculty and students to our fellow Missourians. The series has become even more successful than we originally hoped. And while the pandemic has stopped us from traveling to St. Louis and Kansas City to present our work in front of crowds, or at least large groups of people, we've reached out to all of you virtually, and it's been a success. So thank you so much for coming. You are one of the keys to the success of this series. So we've got a great program tonight, and the first person I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to everyone is the moderator, Jack Bastable. Now, you won't see Jack until after Laura gives her presentation. More about her in a moment. But let me tell you real briefly about Jack. I first met him at the Arts and Science Strategic Development Board years ago. The amazing thing about Jack is that you're immediately and simultaneously at ease, encouraged, and impressed by him. I didn't know that much about who he was at the time. Sorry, Jack. But when I learned that Jack was a pro athlete, CEO of his own company, and an amazing supporter of Mizzou, arts and science, and all of our faculty and students, I wasn't the least bit surprised. He's just that kind of a person. And then let me get to the reason that we're all here. Dr. Laura King. Laura is Curators Distinguished Professor of Psychological Sciences here at Mizzou. She has an amazing list of publications, awards, accomplishments that are simply too long for me to list, and you really don't want to hear from me tonight. She studies personality, psychology, well-being, meaning of life, and other topics around those areas. She has designed and co-taught one of our newest, most popular classes, The Art and Science of Living. And as a side note, I first met Laura several years ago when she served on a dissertation committee with me. And I can tell you she brought in just an amazing perspective from a social psychological approach. I'm a political scientist. And the care with which she worked with students was truly amazing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura. And I'm also told I'm supposed to remind you that we'll have a presentation and Q&A, and you can enter your questions anytime during the event, and we'll try to get to each one of them. So with that, Laura?
Thanks, Cooper. Yeah, that's me. Oh gosh. So thank you all for coming. I wish I could see you, and I really wish we could be in person, but hopefully we will power through. It seems like during this pandemic, lots of people have been wondering about what makes life meaningful. And so I'm pretty excited to talk to you tonight about my work and what it tells us about the fact that life is meaningful even during a pandemic. My email is here on this title slide. And if anything I talk about is particularly interesting to you, feel free to drop me an email. I can send you reprints, or if we don't get to your question, drop me an email. It's kingla@missouri.edu. Okay, so let's get started. Can I get the next slide? Okay, so we have to start by talking a little bit about prepositions and capital letters. There are two things here, right? The meaning of life and this other thing, meaning in life. The meaning of life suggests that there's one big answer to this giant question. And we will not be talking about that today. I'm a psychologist. I leave that question of the meaning of life as if there's one answer and one size that fits all to philosophers and theologians and other navel gazers. Not that all the philosophers are navel gazers, but we're not going to be talking about the meaning of life. We're going to talk about little m and little l, meaning in life. As a psychologist, I'm interested in studying people's experiences. And we can talk about meaning in life as a subjective experience that people have. You've all had it yourself, right? When you felt like your life felt super meaningful. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we can go to the next slide. So the first thing I want to do, and I want to make sure that there's time for questions and conversation with Jack. So I'm going to rush through some ideas here that will hopefully get your head around what it means to study meaning in life. And we got to start out by busting some myths. You probably think you know a lot about meaning in life, and tonight would go really well if you just forget all of it. These are 5 myths about meaning in life. That meaning in life, how can you study that? Isn't it ineffable? You can't even define it. How can it be possibly studied with science? Or this idea that the experience of meaning in life is attached to a few really big, profound experiences or accomplishments. Or the idea that meaning in life is rare and reserved only for a few people, right? The elites who have the resources, the time, and the energy to devote to constructing a life of meaning. Or this idea that to experience meaning, we have to think super hard, right? You have to search, you have to struggle, you have to create meaning. And then finally, the idea that meaning in life is fragile and easily destroyed by negative experiences. All of these things, all 5 of these beliefs are demonstrably false. So we're going to go through each one rather quickly. So the first question is, can meaning in life be defined? Yes, it can. Next slide. We can define it. Here's a definition. My students and I published this definition many years ago. Lives may be experienced as meaningful when they are felt to have significance beyond the trivial or momentary, to have purpose, or to have a coherence that transcends chaos. Those 3 orange words, significance, purpose, and coherence, are widely now understood to be at least 3 of the most important aspects of feeling that life is meaningful. Feeling like we matter existentially, that our existence has made a contribution to the world, that we have purpose, that our behaviors are driven by personally valued goals, and coherence, that our lives make sense. We're going to return to these 3 facets when we start talking a little more about the pandemic. But for now, let's keep going. We can define meaning in life. So now the question is it limited to profound experiences? It isn't. Our work has shown that the experience of meaning in life is embedded in everyday experiences, like being in a pretty good mood. This picture is a sunrise off Stewart Road, where I live here in Columbia. So we did this study long ago. One of my students and I were interested in measuring meaning in life. We just asked people, is your life meaningful and purposeful? And one of the things we found that really surprised us was the strongest predictor of meaning in life, the most consistent predictor, was whether people were in a good mood when they filled out the questionnaire. How could this possibly be? Well, one way to think about it is, meaning in life makes people happy. That's why people buy self-help books to find more meaning in their lives, because they want to be happy. We also did a study where we had MU students rate their lives every day. And each day they rated what mood they were in, the events that happened, the goals they worked on, and then they rated how meaningful that day was. The strongest predictor of a day being meaningful was whether the person was in a good mood that day, whether they experienced positive emotions, simple ones like happiness and cheerfulness and enjoyment. Now, if you took any psychology classes, you know that correlation does not imply causation. So to really test the causal direction of the relationship between the experience of meaning in life and being in a good mood, we did a bunch of experiments, and we've done a bunch of these experiments. And the results of one of the very first ones we did is there before you. We randomly assigned people to groups, and we put them in various moods. We can put people in a positive mood. It's pretty easy, right? If you give them a cookie they weren't expecting, or some money, or you have them write about a happy memory of theirs, or you have them listen to happy music. We also put people in a negative mood, and then we had other people in what we call freestanding neutral mood. They just, whatever mood they brought with them into the lab. So we randomly assigned them to those conditions, put them in those moods, and then immediately had them rate their meaning in life on a questionnaire that asked things like, my life is very purposeful and meaningful. And as you can see, the positive mood induction led to higher meaning in life. Being in a pretty good mood causes life to feel meaningful. The other thing I want you to notice is the negative mood condition, because we're going to come back to that later. Putting people in a bad mood did not deflate meaning in life. They were just the same as people in a neutral mood. Okay, next slide. So meaning in life isn't just about being in a good mood. There are other very simple everyday experiences that make life feel meaningful. We live in a natural world that is filled with coherence, right? Objects fall down, they don't fall up. We have, Fridays, and we have Saturdays and Sundays. We have morning coffee, right? We have a structure to our lives. We decided to see, would that structure, right, the natural structure of the world, potentially play a role in making life feel meaningful? So what we did in these studies is we had 16 beautiful pictures of trees. There were 4 for each season, right? And what we did, we just had people look at these pictures and rate them for the contrast in the picture. We told them, we just want to know how this looks on your monitor. So everybody in the study saw 16 beautiful pictures of trees. Everybody loved these pictures. Everybody was put in a good mood by them. What the people didn't know is that for half of them, we presented the pictures in random order. And the other half, we presented the pictures in 4 cycles of the seasons. So they conformed to the seasons, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter. Spring, summer, fall, winter. Immediately after they did this rating task, we had them rate their meaning in life. Guess what? Meaning in life was higher after people were exposed to those seasonal patterns than it was when they saw these beautiful pictures in random order. They had no idea about this order manipulation, right? They didn't know that that's what we had done. But just the regularity and pattern enhanced the feeling that life is meaningful. Now, if regularity and pattern in the world makes life more meaningful, is it possible that regularity in our lives might make life more meaningful? So the next slide. Oops, something went wrong. Okay. No, that's okay. Just go on back. Let's go back to the one about the trees. You'll be able to find it. Oh gosh, spoiler alert. Yes, there it is. Okay. So if structure in the natural world makes life more meaningful, could structure in our lives make life more meaningful? So a former student of mine here at Mizzou, Samantha Heitzelman, who is now an assistant professor at the University of Rutgers, she was at the University of Virginia doing a postdoc, and we did this study. We beeped students at random times during the day on their smartphones, and we had them rate what they were doing at that moment and whether it was a part of their daily routine or not. And then they rated their meaning in life. And what we found is that those moments when they were engaged in their routine, in their everyday behavior, were actually rated as more meaningful than otherwise. Just a little. Life's just a little more meaningful when we are engaged in our routine. If you think about all the routines we have, morning coffee, a glass of wine in the evening, the show we watch regularly, the sports team that we follow, these routines are enhancing a sense that life is meaningful. Now, one of the big, when we first published this kind of work, one of the reviewers said something that you might all be thinking right now. Well, wait a minute. If meaning in life can emerge out of just being in a good mood, something as trivial and small as our daily routines, if you think of all the routines we have, life would be super meaningful. Wouldn't life be brimming with meaning? And that, it turns out, is an empirical question, and we can answer it. And we did. So we looked at the world and said, of all the studies that have been done where meaning in life has been measured, how meaningful is it? So the next slide. There we go. Meaning in life, it's not rare. It's not reserved for a chosen few. It's commonplace. What you're looking at now are the results of a study by Shigeo Ishii and Ed Diener, where they did this Gallup global poll of 122 nations. And in the poll, people were asked a yes or no question. Do you feel your life has a special purpose or meaning? At the level of nation, 91% of the people who responded said yes. 91%. That's a lot. Almost everybody thinks their life has a special purpose or meaning. That little blue arrow, it shows you where we are, the United States. Pretty high, still very high. That red line is showing that actually wealthier nations report lower meaning, or we're more likely to say no to this than poorer nations, where many people, 100% of the people sampled, said yes. Okay, and the next one. Then you're thinking, well, yes or no questions, Laura. What the heck? That's not the way we measure things, right? Maybe they said yes because their life was a teeny bit meaningful. So Samantha and I did a study. We looked at every study ever done where they measured meaning in life. And in these studies, a variety of samples had been asked to rate items like, my life is purposeful and meaningful. All of these are on a scale from 1 to 7, and this is just a frequency distribution of the means that were reported in those studies. And this represents thousands of people. And as you can see, the most common answer, right, is nearly 5 on a scale from 1 to 7. That's pretty meaningful. Some of these particular samples are really interesting. So in some of these samples, people were selected because they had gone through a traumatic life event or because they had been asked to write about some negative thing in their lives. Even in those samples, the average meaning in life was 4.8 on a scale from 1 to 7. That is significantly above the midpoint of the scale. An interesting study of women with breast cancer. And they were interested in doing an intervention to improve these women's experience of meaning in life. Those two numbers, 4.66 and 5.22, those are the baseline ratings prior to the intervention on a scale from 1 to 7. Good luck trying to make life even more meaningful for those people. People diagnosed with a serious psychological disorder for more than a year, their average meaning in life was 5.63. That's very meaningful. And I want to make it clear that these are not studies. Most of these studies are not just samples of undergraduates. But here's what's interesting. Do you see the little dot down there around 2.5 to 2.99? That very small blip was a mean that came from a study of college students. And we can talk later about why I think that that is a thing, that college students need to know that their lives are meaningful and they are the ones most likely to question it. Okay, well, I'm sorry, not yet. So these are, in my opinion, this is really good news, right? Little homely ratings on a scale from 1 to 7, how meaningful is your life? This is important, it turns out. People who rate their lives as meaningful are better off on so many dimensions than people who rate their lives as less meaningful. It predicts outcomes like occupational success, lifetime earnings, social appeal, risk of suicide, even in the context of intense depression. People who say their lives are meaningful are less likely to think about suicide. These little homely items, right, we're asking people to measure, might seem kind of small, but they really are important. They predict important outcomes. Lower risk of Alzheimer's disease, slower rate of age-related cognitive decline, right? These are important ratings. And it turns out, and it's a wonderful thing, that most people live lives that they feel are pretty meaningful. Now, psychologists don't necessarily like this. And maybe some of you are thinking, oh, no, this is ridiculous. Life isn't meaningful. These people are rating their lives as meaningful because they don't know what meaning is. And I would reply, well, I'm a psychologist and I'm interested in human beings and experiences they have, not experiences that I've invented or that are only interesting to eggheads. I think it's really cool that everyday people do find a lot of meaning in their everyday lives. If you're still feeling skeptical, let me ask you to do this. Look at that graph and imagine that those means were not for the experience of meaning in life, but for something terrible. If I said, oh, this is violence or this is aggression, would it seem better to you suddenly, more valid, more real? I think a lot of people are interested in hearing the bad news about life. And the truth is, this is such good news. Now, it's not good news for people who are trying to sell books to make people's lives more meaningful because it's showing that their lives already are. But I think it's the greatest news ever. Everyday people know that their lives are meaningful. Okay, now the next one. So the other thing, right? We have to construct meaning. We have to think super hard about it. Meaning is not always constructed. And it's actually not associated with actively thinking about meaning. There's absolutely no evidence that people who sit around and think super hard about what makes life meaningful actually experience more meaning as a result of those efforts. Instead, what we have found is that meaning is more about engaging your intuition. It's more about noticing connections in the environment. It's more about seeing sometimes magical connections that can exist in the world. Thinking does not predict more meaning. In fact, what we have found is that low meaning, when we feel life is lacking in meaning, that's when we start thinking. And it turns into a potential vicious circle, right? Where you're thinking about meaning, but meaning we don't gain meaning by thinking about it. We gain meaning by being with people we care about, by enjoying things that we love, and through enacting our daily routines. Okay, the next one. Viktor Frankl, you've probably heard of him, right? His famous volume, Man's Search for Meaning, really started the psychology of meaning. And oftentimes when I talk about my work, there's psychologists in the back of the room just like flipping out because I dare to cite Viktor Frankl. Because Frankl, of course, was talking about his observations in a Nazi concentration camp, right, during the Holocaust. But Frankl and I agree like so much on so many things. And he said, what is demanded of us is not, as some existential philosophers teach, to endure the meaninglessness of life, but rather to bear our incapacity to grasp its unconditional meaning in rational terms. I agree with Frankl that life is unconditionally meaningful. And even during really difficult times, we need to think about how life is still meaningful. Okay, the next one. So even during a pandemic, I would say, life remains unconditionally meaningful. And the question is, how? How is it that even this life that we've been in, this year, this long, long, difficult year, and I am not a person who's coped well with the pandemic at all, but I still know that my life and yours has meaning during this time. How might that be the case? So let's go to the next slide. To think about meaning in life during the pandemic, I want to revisit these facets of meaning that I discussed at the very beginning, right? Significance, right? That your life matters in some way. And it's measured with items like, even considering how big the universe is, I can say that my life matters. Obviously, the pandemic has been a big, giant jolt to our feelings of significance. So many of the ways we influence the world have been taken from us, right? The ways that we influence the lives of others, our opportunities to reach out and help, have been severely constrained by the pandemic and our social distancing and all of the things we're doing to stay healthy and safe. Coherence, right? Or comprehension, this idea that our lives make sense, which is measured with items like, look at my life as a whole, things seem clear to me. Or my life fits together, the story of my life makes sense. One of the ways, right, that we experience coherence is through those routines. And if there's one thing the pandemic did, is it threw our routines out the window. And I know, when talking to people about these routines and how important they are to meaning in life, and people think, well, okay, so during the pandemic, I'm just going to have a whole bunch of new routines and I'm going to do them and then we'll do the same thing. It can't. The routines that have been giving our lives meaning, right? They're built up on the associations that we have done in our lifetimes, not in a few weeks, maybe not even in a year. So we can see how the pandemic has really shattered, in my opinion, the sense of coherence. And then finally, purpose, right? Having goals and aims and things we strive for. That's measured with items like, I have certain life goals that compel me to keep going. Now, the pandemic, one would think, has also interfered with a lot of our capacity to pursue our goals, right? So many people have found like they can't get the work done that they're wanting to do. They can't do the things they want to do. They can't go to the places that they want to go, right? These purposes have been thwarted in so many ways by this pandemic. So, how can we understand meaning during a difficult time? We can get clues from research on other bad times. Let's go to the next slide. So, one of the things that my students and I, and this is my student Hope Rose and my other student Jake Womack and I here at Mizzou have been working on this project about what's called ACEs. Now, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And what you're looking at is a model predicting global meaning in life, that is how meaningful a person thinks their life is overall, as a function of their scores on coherence, significance, and purpose. Look what happens. These negative childhood experiences, they're negatively related to global meaning. They're negatively related to coherence and significance. But they're not negatively related to feelings of purpose. There's no line there. ACEs, these negative childhood experiences, are associated with lower levels of global meaning because they're associated with coherence and significance, not because they're associated with purpose. Purpose remains resilient and somehow able to continue to fill life with meaning, regardless of these negative events. Okay, the next one. Now, this is another study where we're looking at ACEs and meaning in life. If you look at those bars, right, the lighter the shade, the more negative life experiences the person reported having, the more difficult, traumatic childhood experiences they had. And here we're looking at their how those experiences relate to coherence, significance, and purpose. And we asked all of these people to think about a time, these were MU students, about their most negative experience from childhood, and they wrote about it for a little while, and then they rated coherence, significance, and purpose. And what we see is that, sure, for coherence and significance, the more ACEs a person had, the lower those scores went. But for purpose, having a difficult time, having experienced difficulties in life was actually related to higher purpose. Having this sense, having lived through and survived something difficult, meant that purpose remained resilient even after being reminded of those bad times. And we all know people, right, who've had very negative experiences, and in those experiences find a purpose. This suggests that maybe purpose is the one that's going to stay with us as an available way that we can pursue meaning even during a very difficult time. So the next slide. So this is the first study we did during the pandemic. This is about 1,000 MU staff members and some students. And we just asked them, have you or your family been directly affected by COVID-19? And those ratings on the x-axis are how much they said they had been affected. And as you can see, those dark bars, guess what? That's purpose. No matter how much a person said that they had been affected by COVID-19, they and their families, right? Significance and coherence both stayed stable and kind of low, and purpose was the one that really pops out. And these are very high levels of purpose at the beginning of the pandemic. So we followed up on this with a big, this big 3-wave study of Americans. And this was the same people at each wave. Can we see the next slide? And I just threw this together because I wanted you to see those red bars. So the blue bars are coherence, the green bars are significance, and the red bars are purpose. Now notice, one thing I want you to notice right away is the the y-axis is truncated because people, even significance and coherence, are still pretty high. Even during the pandemic, people are saying, I matter to people, my life and my existence are important, and my world makes sense. But even more so, they are saying their lives have purpose, and purpose stayed as the strongest predictor of meaning over the course of these 3 waves of data collection that we finished sometime in November. So throughout the pandemic, purpose stayed high. And actually, they all increased a bit. Okay, the next one. So the pandemic did not destroy meaning. It left us sources of meaning, including simple pleasures, each other, and nature with its natural rhythms. And we can try to overlay those rhythms with our own new pandemic routines. They will kick in eventually. It also left us with other things. It left us with art and music and poetry. And Cooper mentioned this Art and Science of Living class. And for me, that class was so great because it happened, right? We were finishing that class just as the pandemic hit. And my life was so enriched by the poetry that Alex Socarides shared as part of that class. Artists, poets, musicians are looking at the world always through meaning-tuned eyes. And they allow us, right, to see that meaning even when we're having trouble recognizing it. The pandemic certainly left us with grief. But grief is also meaningful. Frankl, when he was talking about people in the concentration camp, right, and he was talking about how they thought about meaning. Is our existence meaningful? Is what we're doing meaningful in some way? And some people, he said, would say that they would attach the idea of meaning to survival. If we get through this, then our lives will have been meaningful. And Frankl rejected that as a way to think about meaning. He said a life that depends on that happenstance is not a life worth living. Even super meaningful lives end. And no one can talk about meaning without confronting the reality of death and grief. Grief is a meaningful emotion. Remember that chart, that figure. Negative feelings don't deflate meaning. They can be meaningful too. And I think that it is part of being engaged in life is grief, and which is a testament to what we mean to each other and why we are significant. The pandemic has also left us with the capacity for purpose and agency. And to the extent that people have found purpose during this time, right? And some data we have suggests that purpose is coming from things we would maybe not expect. Wearing a mask and washing your hands, right? That purpose is the one aspect of meaning that's most tied to the behaviors we engage in to keep ourselves safe and keep the people we love safe. The pandemic also has not rid us of hope. It is not a hopeless situation. Another one of my students, graduate students, Megan Edwards, has been studying the relationship between hope and meaning. And it looks to us like hope might be the thing that explains why is being in a pretty good mood so strongly related to the experience of meaning. One of the reasons is because when you feel one good thing, you feel a bunch of them. And among those great things of being happy and cheerful is hope, is feeling hopeful. We have all of those wonderful resources. They're already built in. They're built into the world that we are adapted to live in, a world that makes sense. Yeah, are there senseless acts? Yes. Are there things that it's hard to make sense of? Yes. Do those things occupy everyday life? Are they there always? No. Life makes sense most of the time, and life is meaningful. Now I'm going to stop because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to call Jack out here. Jack, got anything to say? Jack, you are muted.
Sorry about that.
Oh dear. Technical difficulties. Perhaps, Jack, you could put questions in the chat that I could see. Or if no one has any, somebody might. You are muted still, Jack.
As we're thinking about those sending questions in, I did have one question, and that was awesome, and really appreciate you sharing those. I just love your passion about this topic. So would you say ultimately that the people that are struggling, there's a lot of people struggling about finding meaning and through this thing, would you say that helping them understand the everyday things in life that help provide them purpose is helpful? Or what would you say is kind of the holy grail that you would want people? Because there's a lot of people experiencing mental health difficulties and challenges. And so how can we help those? What could we say to those people?
Yeah, so let me say this. I think, first of all, if somebody is struggling with like depression or anxiety, and certainly the pandemic has made those issues more prominent in many people's lives, get help. There are treatments, right, for these things, right? That's one of the things psychologists have done a great job of doing. So getting help for those things, I think, is super important. I also think that thinking about why you're feeling bad, right? If you're feeling bad, and that if it's something, if you're feeling bad for a reason, then I don't know that those bad feelings are things to get rid of, right? They're telling you something. One of the reasons I got interested in studying meaning in life at all was because my mother died. And after my mother died, I started thinking about what does it all mean? And I didn't want to be happy. I wanted to understand that experience. And so negative feelings are not sort of the opposite of meaning, not at all, right? And so I think that's important. The other thing I would like to say is I think people recognize that they're searching for meaning. And then they say to me, well, Laura, how can you say that life is meaningful when I'm searching? Well, do you want oxygen? Yes. Do you need oxygen? Yes. So just because you have oxygen doesn't mean you say, okay, I'm giving up oxygen now, right? Meaning is like oxygen. It's something we need and it's something we have. And it's fine to search for meaning. I think it's great, right? I think that like thinking about your purpose and what should it be is fine. But that search occurs in a larger context of a life filled with meaning, in my opinion.
I've got a question here. Since coherence enhances meaningness in life, does it mean that people who are most organized with highly structured life have most meaningness in their life?
That's such a great question. Okay, so now, first of all, are you that kind of person? Because no. But anyway, I'm not that kind of person. But people who say, this is fun, people who answer a questionnaire about structure, right? Where they say, I drive the same way to work every day. Or once I figure out one way to do something, I stick with it. That's actually related to a little higher meaning in life. I think more important, it's really important to think about that coherence isn't everything, right? And too much structure, right? So much routine that life becomes boring. And then that is not a meaningful life either, right? Maintaining pleasure. And I would say, I think one of the things that's so important is noticing these magical connections that happen in life that can really enrich our sense of meaning. And sometimes those things happen by accident, and sometimes they happen when we're off our routine. So let's go ahead and be structured, but also keep your eyes open for the unexpected.
Great question. Hey, here's a good one. People who have higher ACE scores, you've shown, are they more likely to report meaningless in life when in a negative mood, or are they more likely to report meaningless in life when they're in a positive mood?
Just like that is also such a great question, and I actually have the data. No, they report like everybody else. They report high meaning in life when they're in a good mood. So positive mood is still predicting meaning in life for those individuals. What they are able to do, which I think is fascinating, right, is maintain a sense of purpose, even in the face of negative things. And we know, right, I mean, nobody wants to sign up for a difficult life or a difficult childhood. We had, but we know too that no problems, never experiencing difficulty in life, especially in childhood, can mean the person doesn't know how to cope with difficulty. And so we're kind of arguing that these negative childhood experiences are opportunities to perhaps develop this motivational strength of purpose. And maybe it's what helps people, right, continue on. And when they encounter difficulties later in life, maybe that purpose is able to kick in. Because it is fascinating to me that they are, in fact, able to maintain a sense of purpose even in the face of really difficult childhood memories.
That's really excellent. Hey, one of the things, and this is a consistent question we've gotten, is that, that's really a great example of how fantastic science happens in schools and academia, and so we really love to see that. And how would you suggest taking some of this science and some of us to work with organizations and individuals outside of academia? How do we apply some of this stuff? How do we promote it? How do we make it practical for them?
Right. So I think there's a couple of things to think about in that regard, right? The worst way that it has been suggested to me. So every time I think about, I'm going to write this book, right? I'm going to help people understand meaning in life. All anybody wants to know is, what are the 3 things that will make my life more meaningful, right? And my point is, you don't need to buy a book, and you don't need to take a workshop. You don't need to hire a life coach. Your life is meaningful, and your task is to notice, to own it, and ask yourself the question, what are you going to do with this incredibly meaningful life that you've got? As far as organizations go, so one of my former graduate students, who's now an assistant professor in the business school at the University of Illinois, she and I actually wrote a whole paper about how to think about the science of meaning in organizations and the science, how to make work meaningful. And the thing is, there's very little research about these issues in an organizational setting, right? We don't know. Do people who see their work as meaningful, are they more productive? We don't know. But some of the things we do know, people spend an awful lot of time at work, and making that work meaningful, making it a way that a person can enjoy a predictable, structured life, making it a way that the person has an opportunity to achieve purposes, and making it a setting where they feel they're making a difference is going to enhance their sense of meaning in life.
Hey, great question. There's some great questions coming in. One of these questions kind of relates to this idea: if I have these maybe an extraordinary experience where I'm traveling in an exotic country and having a kind of a peak experience, or as Chip and Dan Heath talk about in the power of moments, maybe this higher level of an experience, is that how does that novel experience overwhelm the mundane? Do we think we have to keep having those? Is that what happens to us? We keep looking for the higher experience,
it's so cool. Okay, so think about that, right? When the emotion you're talking about is awe, right? That feeling of awe. And what's interesting about awe is it shakes up our usual frame of reference, right? It makes us stop and accommodate a new way of thinking about the world, right? It's breathtaking. Awe is actually one of a strong predictor of the experience of meaning, right? So when we have these experiences that take us out of our everyday moment, right, we are also maximizing a really intense and often positive relationship with the world, right? It is about, and even sometimes when awe is a little bit frightening, right, when you get goosebumps, those are certainly meaningful. And because I really stress this idea that meaning is embedded in our everyday lives, doesn't mean that it isn't found in these really profound experiences, right? The 2 most meaningful events of my life were certainly the birth of my son and the death of my mother. And those were giant ones, right? Those were gigantic experiences of immense feeling, right? Where I was there on all cylinders. Certainly profound events contribute to a meaningful life, but meaning is not just about those moments. Meaning is something that we're engaged in at all times.
What magical connections? What can you provide some examples of that? What do you mean by that?
I'll tell you one. So when I was in college, I took voice lessons all the way through my 4 years to prepare me for my future as an opera singer, whatever. So this one day, I'm going to have to be a little bit specific here because the details the devil is indeed in the details. So my class was every Friday at 11 a.m. and it ended at 11:50. I was at Kenyon College in Ohio, and it happened to be like sometime in January, the beginning of the spring semester. I was standing in this on the stage, and I was trying to hit the super high note that I had never hit before. And my teacher was running up the scale and running up the scale, and I was trying to hit this, and I hit it. And I hit that note just incredibly sound. And that moment, January of 1986. Now, yes, I know. Did anybody hear the story? Okay. I hit the high note. At the very moment I hit it, there was an earthquake in rural Ohio in January 1986. And if you don't believe me, look it up, because it's actually on record. Doesn't mention my name because I didn't cause that earthquake. But all over Ohio, I'm sure people thought they caused that earthquake by singing a beautiful note, by screaming at someone, by slamming a door, by plugging in their hairdryer, right? We make these connections. I stood on that stage and sustained that note, and I knew that I had found my superpower, right? And I would only use it for good. I caused that earthquake. I think magic happens at other times too. Once when I was, after my mother died, her sister started dying. And I had gone away. This is when I lived in Dallas. I'd gone away for a funeral. And when I came back, my beautiful flower garden was gone. It was ruined because I'd left the sprinkler system on and there was a freeze. And this was a former yard of the month, y'all. Oh my gosh. So I had to go out there with my gardening gloves and start pulling everything out. And I pulled all these dead things out, and I cried, and I thought to myself, this is what it's like. This is what the world is like. Like nothing good really lasts. All dying, all these beautiful flowers gone. And I pulled what turned a bunch of young stalks coming up out of the ground to take the place of those dead flowers. And I had to stand there and look at them and say to myself, okay, I'll be a sprout. That all these great people are dying, but there are other great people who can come up, and we'll never replace them. But we're going to be that next generation for the people who come after us.
Awesome. Hey, can you talk a little bit about the difference between happiness and meaning?
So they're very strongly related, but they are separable, right? For example, a person who has, let's say, deep religious faith, right? Religiosity predicts higher meaning in life. That person is going to experience high meaning in life, whether they're happy or not, right? Positive mood, being in a good mood, being happy is going to, if you think about it, it's kind of interesting. A person who has lots of friends, lots of social connections, that person's life is also probably going to feel meaningful regardless of their mood. But for a person who does not have deep religious faith, or a person who is lonely, positive mood, being happy, can actually boost their meaning to that same level as someone with these other more maybe putative sources of meaning, these more meaningful things that make life meaningful. Meaning and happiness can predict different outcomes, I guess. Happiness may be more likely to predict outcomes that are about us, meaning more likely to predict outcomes about helping others, right? So they are separable experiences. What was one of the poems Alex recommended? Should I say? Let me think. There's one about the orange. I don't remember who the poet is, but it's really great. And the truth is, it was read at Alex's wedding. And it's just beautiful. So if you get that, if you look for the poem called The Orange, it's really good. It makes me cry every time because I'm a crier. Oh, Jack, you're muted.
Here's a question about people that when they're asked about their meaning, they have more than, how much time do they have to reflect on answering that question? Do they have an hour or more, or do they immediately just have to think about it, or would that make a difference? Do you think?
No, it's so cool. Okay, so we actually did the study. We did a study where we told people, okay, you're going to fill out this questionnaire, and before you answer, like really give it some thought, really think it through, like about your thoughts. So be very thoughtful, take your time, think it through. These other people, we said, just decide, make whatever decisions you want. Just quickly answer the question, just like usual. The funny thing is, when people thought it through carefully, their mood, their positive mood, was more strongly related to their ratings of meaning in life. I think when people, and I should say that relationship between positive mood and meaning increases as we get older. It is not about, these shallow undergraduates, blah, blah, blah. It's really about wisdom and recognizing that a good day might be one filled with simple pleasures, small goals that you accomplish, and that is what makes life feel meaningful.
Awesome. I've got a question here while others are still thinking about, if we still have time. So we're reflecting on what's important to us, and we're looking for answers, but really many of those answers which you're proposing are within us. If we are just a little more, not seeking constantly, but also just kind of reflecting more, experience more. Would you say that's what the mindfulness movement has been about, just to be mindful of the present and not try to look forward so much, and really enjoy that? Is that is that a skill that helps with your finding meaning?
Yeah, I think, so I think that I would think the mindfulness part absolutely makes sense, right? To me, we need a whole bunch of different verbs to talk about meaning in life, right? It's not searching, it's not creating, it's not struggling, it's not making sense. It's noticing, and it's being present in those meaningful moments. And I don't know why we have this tendency to argue meaning away, right? When something happens that's meaningful and we think to ourselves, well, that's not meaningful. It's nothing. Think it through, get rid of it somehow. Instead of savoring meaning when it's there and sitting in those moments and enjoying them, right? And letting them let nature heal us sometimes, right? Look at the beauty of the world, the gorgeous sunset that's coming right now, right? The beautiful sunrise. Savoring those moments isn't about being silly or, this kind of lazy ideas about self-care. It's really because you're part of that world. You're part of that natural world. Savoring those moments of beauty, I think, is just a really wonderful way to live a meaningful life.
I don't see any additional questions here. So I'm just wondering if you want to kind of close with some closing thoughts for us. Dr. King,
so crazy.
As you kind of summarize things for us, and as we're reflecting, it's been so helpful. And the thing that's been impressed upon me is just noticing more, be more conscious of the little things that draw meaning. And the other thing is, make sure if I'm gonna put myself in a good mood, and maybe I just want to turn that one song that I love on, it's gonna just pop me right there. Get me right there.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think people lose track, right? When you're laughing, life is meaningful. When you are engaged, having a conversation with someone you care about, life is meaningful. It isn't about finding one big answer to capital M meaning of capital L life. It's about living every day. It's about investing in each other, right? Reaching out when we can and noticing meaning that's happening all around us.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure, thanks so much, Jack. It's so good to see you.
It's so good. We really appreciate the work you're doing, and with all of your colleagues there, and what you're trying to advance for all of us. This is probably one of the most timely. Well, it's just so relevant to all of us as we've gone through this, because in many ways, our lives have become even more meaningful through a pandemic, because of the challenges we face. We kind of force us into new routines and reflecting on things. And yeah, no, and it's going to continue. It's not going to all of a sudden come back to whatever normal was. I think it will be very.
I hope we never forget these lessons. I hope we never forget these lessons and always remember how precious that everyday life was, so that when we're back in something like our everyday routine again, just look at how wonderful it is. Just remember these days and how much we longed for it.
Hey, one of the things, that was a question here, and I'll just throw this out since we got one more minute or so to go that came in. Do you know if people with children find more meaning versus people that don't have children?
I'll tell you what children do. We have not looked at whether having kids makes life more meaningful. There's this like rumor going on out there in the world that having children makes you less happy. That's actually not true. Most of the data suggests that having children, spending time with children, is a source of warm and happy and a source of meaning. But one of the things lately is trying to understand hope, and especially how hope functions as this happy feeling. And we have a ton of studies. Like, this is a whole other talk. We'll do this again sometime about hope. All we do is show people pictures of sleeping babies, and their hope increases. Pictures of sleeping babies versus pictures of sleeping adults. Babies, pictures of babies smiling, pictures of smiling adults. Right now, we're getting ready to do a study with pictures of crying babies to see if they make people more hopeful. But children are really the future. They're telling us, right? They're just walking symbols of a better tomorrow.
Great. Well, hey, I would say that certainly if there's other questions or things that come to mind, certainly send an email to Dr. King. She'd be more than happy to respond to you, have the conversation continue. I can hardly wait to share some of the thoughts that you've shared, and really appreciate the great work again you're doing through the School of Arts and Science at the University of Missouri, and all the great things that the others are doing there as well. So I guess turn it back to our official host here and sign off. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Thanks to everybody who came.